Good evening. Welcome to the locker room here on Indie Live Radio, and we are also live on Independence Live as well. Now, you may have noticed we weren't on last week, unfortunately, but we are back on as good and as big as ever. And tonight, I am your host with the most. Yes, it's me, Graham Duffy, and I am absolutely delighted to be joined by the legend of Indie Live Radio and Independence Live. He is the host of the Thursday night show, Our Country, and you will also know that tomorrow he does a Saturday show. It is the man himself. It is Mr. James E. James, how are you?
I'm very good, Graham. Thanks very much for such a glowing introduction. I am suitably chagrined by that. It's great to be back on the locker room.
Fantastic. We have a lot to get through, and I'm hoping that also later on we'll be joined by Mr. Regan Stevenson when he eventually turns up. Typical, you kind of get these Celtic fans are always late, aren't they? But never mind. They are shocking, isn't it? But let us start. Well, where should we start? Let's start with last night's Europa League action as Rangers were in Germany as they played RB Leipzig in the semi-final of their playoff game. Now, Rangers went down by 1-0 to RB Leipzig, a very, very late goal by Angelino in the 85th minute. James, what did you make of the game and what did you make of Rangers' performance last night?
Well, I did actually see the game this time around, because normally when there's a game on a Thursday night, I'm doing a show on the radio, so I don't have the TV on. But I thought since I'm coming on today, I would have it on, so I was keeping an eye on it. Overall, I was a little bit bored by the game. I didn't think it was that exciting as a game, although Rangers did come into it in the second half. And in all honesty, I think probably Leipzig should have won by more. And I think Rangers are well and truly still in this. It's an old cliche, but it's only half time in the tie. And they get them to Ibrox next week, full house. I think it will be quite difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think Rangers, they did defend very well. They didn't really create a lot. I think in the second half, Ryan Kent flashed the ball across the box that Tavernier just couldn't quite get the end off. But I think if you're a Rangers fan going into that game last night, and given the fact that, RB Leipzig are fourth in the German league, but a very, very good side, I think a 1-0 defeat going back to Ibrox, I don't want to be that unhappy with that.
No, it's a terrific result, The only thing that would have been better than that, obviously, would have been getting a draw or getting a narrow win. And I expected more from Leipzig because obviously they spent a lot of money. Red Bull has spent a lot of money on that club and on players and stuff like that. And you could see at times throughout the game, the quality of the player from Leipzig was better than Rangers. And what I did find was really strange is when Rangers are playing in the league here in Scotland, defensively, they can be quite shocking. But when they're played in Europe, defensively, they've been very sound. And it's night and day.
We already have a comment. Marjorie Robinson says, "Hi, guys. Hi to you, Marjorie, and thank you for watching. Anyone that's got any comments, feel free to chip in, and we'll read them out live on air. We do love a wee comment or two. For RB Leipzig, they have a French 24-year-old striker called Christian Nkunku. Now, he missed an absolute sitter in the second half. He took it round the defender, round the goalkeeper, and then blasted it over. I'll be honest, I expected that to nest in the bottom of the net, but it didn't quite happen, did it?
Exactly. And I mean, when you think about the goal as well, the guy was so far out, and I was thinking at the time, before he hit it, as the ball was coming out to him, I thought that's going to sail over the bar, because usually when a player's that far off and they hit it, it tends to balloon up. But he hit it so well, and it stayed low. And I don't think McGregor saw it, to be honest, until it was actually gone past him. I really don't think he saw it because of the players in front of him. But whether he could have stopped it, I don't know.
What I would say is, I think if you're Van Bronckhorst and if you're Rangers, you'll be disappointed at the fact that you lost a goal from a set piece. Now, okay, it's a very good finish, but it's a corner in the last 5 minutes. It's headed out, and it's a great finish. But if you're Rangers, you've got to be disappointed you've lost a goal from a set piece, surely.
Well, the thing is, when you're a defender, and many, many moons ago when I played football, I was lucky enough to play up to junior level. The one thing as a defender, we were always told that you couldn't afford to lose your concentration, up towards the end of the game, no matter what the score was, because you had to try and make sure that the opposition didn't get a chance. And quite often you do see that, in the game these days, where a couple of minutes before the end of the game, a free kick, a corner, whatever it is, and the defending side kind of switch off. Yeah, and it either takes an absolutely super save from the goalkeeper.
Yeah, I think, for me, I think for Rangers as well, they didn't have Kemar Roof, they didn't have Morelos, they had Scott Wright playing up front. Maybe a little bit his depth last night. I think if you're Rangers, you'd be looking to, you need a bit more next week going into that game at home. I know they've got a massive game against Celtic this weekend, but that game next week is going to be so important. They'll have the crowd behind them at Ibrox. Do you think that Rangers can turn that 1-0 deficit around and get through to the final of the Europa League?
If they get the first goal, or it stays, 0-0 for a long part of the game, and then they manage to get, a goal towards the end, take it into extra time, I think there's a good chance that they would go through. However, if Leipzig were to score first, and I expect it to be more space for the Leipzig players next week, because Rangers will have to attack, then I think it will be a very, very different game of football. But from a Scottish football perspective, it would be absolutely fantastic if they got to the final. And that's a Celtic supporter saying that to you.
Well, I'm not going to lie. As a Hearts fan, as everyone who watches this knows, I'm a massive Hearts fan. I hope Rangers get to the final. They get extra time and penalties so that Hearts have a good chance of winning the Scottish Cup. And I'm not going to lie. But then,
Graham, as we discussed before we went on air, I thought that last Sunday when the game went to extra time. And we all know what happened.
That is very true. I didn't expect that. I actually thought Celtic win that game, but it's a semi-final. You never know. But I think was there anyone that really stood out in that Rangers team for you last night?
Yeah, I think for me, I think Aribo did a really, really good turn, because I think he kind of went up front in the second half more so than the boy Wright. But then in saying that, do you know what? I don't think I've ever seen Joe Aribo have a bad game since he's been at Rangers. I think he's a wonderful player, and he's so hard to put off the ball. He's such a strong player. It's really, really great. But I thought he was the standout in the Rangers team. Certainly, I saw more of the second half than I did of the first half, I have to admit.
Yeah, I mean, I think Rangers, to be fair to them, they defended very well last night. They were putting bodies on the line. I think Calvin Bassey, in particular, had a couple of really good blocks. Connor Golson. And I think next week, at Ibrox, as I've said, it's going to be a massive, massive game. And I think they're going to have to defend as well next week, because RB Leipzig on the counter-attack are very, very dangerous. They've got a lot of quick players. So I think it's going to be a very difficult game for Rangers next week.
Yeah. Well, as I said, if Rangers will have to come out to win the game. And obviously they're going to have the fans behind them, and that's going to kind of encourage them to play a more expansive game. And if that happens, I could see Leipzig getting something from the game, because they need the space, and they didn't have the space so much in the game last night over the full 90 minutes. Although they did get a little bit more space in the second half because Rangers came out. But if Rangers play, as defensively well as they did, and take the chances whenever they get them next week, then, I reckon, barring Leipzig getting an early goal, I reckon Rangers could probably go through.
I know we spoke about this before on this show as well, but how big a loss do you think Morelos has been for Rangers, that he's been out for quite a while?
Well, I think you can see that it has an effect on the team. I often wonder, how much benefit is he? Because let's be honest, he does have a bit of a short trigger, and often gets himself sent off. Although he has been a little bit better over the last kind of 12, maybe 24 months. But that was always one of the biggest problems that Steven Gerrard had when he was at Rangers, was trying to keep Morelos, from getting himself sent off. But he seems to be a better player this season than he has been in the previous seasons he's been there. Now, I don't know if that's because, the system has changed or whatever has happened, but he does seem to be more of a team player as opposed to before. I always felt he was a bit of a lone gunman.
Obviously, as a Celtic fan, you're delighted with how Celtic are doing, but are you a little bit surprised at the fact that Rangers' form in the league is very different to their form in Europe? Because in European football, they're in the semi-final, they've beaten teams like Dortmund, they've beaten some very good teams. Yet in the league, their form has kind of faded a little bit.
Yeah, well, as we discussed before we came on air, in Europe, Rangers defensively have been very, very good. But quite often in the domestic game, the defence has been very, very poor. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's complacency, because they think, we're coming up against, and this is not disparaging to anybody else, but they might think, we're coming up against a Livingston, or we're coming up against a Dundee United or a Dundee, we don't have to try so hard. But when they're in Europe, they're coming across some great teams and they maybe think, we've got to be really on the game here. I might be wrong, but it's an anomaly. That's the only way to describe it.
Marjorie has commented again. It's good to see your comments here, Marjorie. I would hope for a win for Celtic this Sunday. We will get on to that very shortly. And she said, I heard that Scott Brown is or is he not making a comeback to Celtic? Well, he will be, but it'll be for the Masters team and not the actual Celtic first team. So he will be playing for Celtic at some point, but it will be kind of the older team. But again, that might be something we can come on to later. So I'm gonna ask you for a prediction just now, James, because by the time we come back on next week, the game will have been finished. Do you think Rangers will be in the final of the Europa League?
I will say yes, but as I said before, they have to get an early goal. If they go one down early, I don't see it. But if they get an early goal, then I think they've got enough in the tank, and with the fans behind them, then they should be able to get through that second game.
Yeah, and I'm going to say, I think Rangers might just sneak this. I'm going to say they're going to win 3-2. No, 3-1. We'll go 3-1. We'll be nice and we'll go 3-1.
Okay, I'll go 2-0 on the night. So 2-1 over the two games.
So there you go, Hearts. You've got a chance now because Rangers are getting the final, so don't be knackered, please. But no, it is good for the coefficient. Rangers get to the final, they win it. Absolutely fantastic for Scotland. So let's move on now, and we will get to the games this weekend very shortly. But firstly, we weren't on air last week, just due to staffing issues. So we never had a chance to talk about Hibs, basically, and I want to mention them just now because I'm not biased on this show. Even though I'm a Hearts fan, I'm not biased. I will talk about anything. So, after the Hearts semi-final that Hibs, unfortunately, wink, wink, lost by 2-1 to Hearts, a few days later, it came out that Sean Maloney had been sacked. Now, he only had 19 games in charge, and I thought at the time it was very, very harsh. So, before we talk about Roy Keane, James, I will ask you first. Were you surprised that Sean Maloney was relieved of his duties after only 19 games in charge?
I certainly was. And I'll add to that the owner came out a few days later and basically said that it was a mistake to give the job to Sean Maloney to begin with. Now, if that's the case, should the owner not be getting sacked? I'd love to know if any Hibs fans that might be watching this or listening to this, I'd love for them to come on and give us their thoughts on that, because in my opinion, if he's the man that made the decision to bring in Sean Maloney and he's now saying we shouldn't have done it, why did you do it in the first place? Panic? Who knows?
Possibly. And hello to Jem Brannigan as well, who says, hello lads, always nice to see new listeners and hopefully you're enjoying what you see so far. We've also got Marjorie Robertson again. Hello, Kem. We're getting a lot of viewers here. This is great. I'm loving this.
It's all women as well. Have you noticed?
I have actually. Where's all the men on this show? Come on.
It's because we've got the two hunkiest presenters on the locker room tonight. That's what it is.
Well, we'll go with one, and that's you. It's certainly not me. That's for sure. But the other thing is, I thought about this as well last week, that Ron Gordon, the Hibs owner, has employed his son as head of recruitment. Is that, for me, that's a very, very poor decision, I think, as well.
That's nepotism at, its most glaring. Jobs for the boys, as they say. I mean, I don't know anything about his son, if I'm being honest, right? So I don't know. Maybe the guy is going to be an absolute genius when it comes to recruiting people. But I always have my doubts about Americans and football, or soccer, as they say. I don't really think a lot of them really understand it. Even people that own clubs, I don't think they really understand the nuances of the game.
Now, I know it was a couple of weeks ago, but it's still fresh in my memory, obviously, because Hearts beat Hibs that day. But I will say, it was 2-1, but we'll not go into that. But what I will say is, when Hibs went 2-0 down, I saw quite a few Hibs fans leaving. Now, I think they obviously thought it could have been another hammering. But Hibs, to be fair to Hibs, they came back into the game, and, second half, they were the better sides. Craig Gordon makes an absolutely wonder save from Ryan Poaches' header. And you can see that Hibs were working hard. They go down to 10 men, Joe New with a really daft second yellow card. But for me, I saw a lot of fight and a lot of spirit in that Hibs team. So I think Sean Maloney, for me, should have been given longer.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he came in, in the winter time. So in theory, halfway through the season. I think he should have been allowed to have at least the summer transfer window, because he probably would have had identified players that he would want to bring in, and obviously players that were currently at Hibs that he didn't think, had much of a future there. And that might have made a difference, next season. But he's not been given that opportunity. And that's one of the things that really annoys me about football these days, is that very often managers don't get the time that's required. And I always hark back to when Sir Alex Ferguson went to Manchester United, and they went through an absolutely horrid period. But he was working with all the young guys who were going to come good, the Beckhams and, the Scholeses and all that kind of stuff. And Manchester United stuck by him, even though there was a lot of grumbling about it. But they stuck by him. And the rest, as they say, is history.
On Sean Maloney, what do you think this experience will do for him? Do you think he'll get another job in the future? Or, what do you think this is going to do for Sean Maloney's confidence that he's been sacked after only 19 games in charge?
I think it may make him think twice about, in inverted commas, going to a big club as the main man. Possibly, but then in saying that, I mean, he was assistant manager to Martinez with the Belgian national team, who are probably, maybe not now, but certainly at the time, they were the number one team in the world. So he's obviously got the experience of dealing with players bigger and better than what were at Hibs. So he may take a step back and, go to a smaller team in inverted commas. I did see some stuff in the media about the possibility that he could go back to Celtic. And, I think it was the under-17s or the under-18s that he looked after for a while when he was at Celtic previously, before going to Belgium. So I don't know, but I think he would make a really good manager, but he's still very young, and that's part of the problem, I think, at the moment.
We have William Forbes here. Thank you for joining us, William. Hibs fan, it was blatantly obvious Hibs found it hard trying to play Maloney's style of football. Teams picked up on it and were closing them down. I remember Hearts fans hiring a plane and flying it across Tynecastle to get rid of him with a banner at the back. That was obviously about Robbie Neilson. I wasn't flying the plane, I have to admit. I can't fly, so it wasn't me. But, I mean, do you think that Hibs maybe a little bit rash in sacking Jack Ross? Because I've heard a lot of Hibs fans saying that they shouldn't have got rid of Jack Ross.
Well, again, Jack Ross, relatively speaking, pretty successful. And the team were doing pretty well with him. And then he got the bump. And then obviously they bring in, somebody, relatively speaking, very inexperienced in that respect. I always felt that Jack Ross was a good fit for Hibs when he went there. And I kind of seen him being possibly the man that would take Hibs up to being, not necessarily being second team in the Premier League, but certainly possibly where Hearts are at the moment. I could have seen Hibs being there under Jack Ross, on a consistent basis. But you just, as I say, you just don't know with owners. They might wake up one morning and think, oh, you know what? I know we've won 25 games in the trot, but I'm sacking that guy. I don't like him. He wears horrible tracksuits or whatever the case may be.
Keep all your comments coming, guys. We're loving seeing these comments here. This is only our second time doing this live on this, so it's great to see all your comments, and thank you for everyone that's joining in. We have to get to this week. It came out that one of the candidates for the Hibs job is Roy Keane, the ex-Man United legend. Now, Roy Keane hasn't managed since he managed Ipswich Town in 2009, 2011. We have to ask James, I've put it at the bottom here, would Roy Keane be a success as Hibs manager? What do you think?
I think potentially he could be, but he's been out of the game for a long time, although he's still doing his punditry, and obviously he'll be keeping up with, everything that's going on. I think 10 years there or thereabouts is a long time to be away from being a manager, because generally speaking, managers, they're at a club for whatever amount of time, they leave for whatever reasons, and fairly quickly, they move on to another club. I think he's got the potential to be a very good manager for Hibs. But as I said to you before we went on air, I get the impression that Roy Keane is a kind of Sir Alex Ferguson type manager who would be throwing stuff around in the dressing room and, throwing boots at football players' heads and stuff. I don't know if that would work these days. Mind you, I'd love to be a fly in the wall when it happened, as long as the boot never hit me.
I mean, I'll be honest, I absolutely love watching Roy Keane on Sky Sports. I mean, he just goes in on, he's a Man United legend. He still goes in very hard on Man United players like Harry Maguire. I just the thought of him doing that to guys like Ryan Porteous and that would be honestly hilarious. But I think as well, the fact that, he has been at the game for a long time, but he's a very passionate man. Now, I saw earlier this week as well, the ex-Hibs player Daryl Horgan said that if Roy Keane got the job, he could potentially break the Celtic Rangers dominance. That is very, very difficult to do. And I'll be honest, I just don't see that happening.
Well, let's be honest. To do that, right, a club is going to have to spend big. And just because of the way things are, although Rangers, technically speaking, are not as well off as everybody seems to think they are, from what I've been told. So Celtic really, they spent a lot of time putting money in the bank, and guarding, how they were doing things. And a lot of Celtic supporters, and I had discussions, shall we say politely, with a lot of them regarding it, when they were like, we should spend 12 million, 20 million on such and such. And I'm like, no, they're doing a grand job the way they're doing it, So it would come down to finances. And at the end of the day, are Hearts, Hibs, Aberdeen, Dundee United really, because they're really the teams that are most likely to kind of get to that level, are they going to be able to do it from a financial standpoint? I don't think so.
I will say this now, and I've said this before as well. Hibs should not be in the bottom six. Them Aberdeen are far bigger clubs than that. But unfortunately, if you have a season like they have, listen, Hearts have had this before. We're in the Championship because we weren't good enough. And if you get in a rut that you can't get out of, it's very, very difficult. But I think if you look at that Hibs team, there is good players in there. But I think for me, one of the big things was they lost Martin Boyle and they didn't replace him. They've then obviously lost Kevin Nisbet and Christian Dodge through injury. Now they signed Melkison, they signed Sylvester Jasper, who are decent enough players, but are they that Hibs level? I'm not quite so sure.
I think as well, both of those players, again, relatively speaking, they're young players. And the boy Melkison has got huge potential, absolutely huge potential. They signed him from Bodo Glimt. And we all know that name now, infamously, especially if you're on the green half of Glasgow, you know that name. But I think it was Motherwell he played, and he was sort of up front. I think it was maybe the first or second game after Nisbet got injured. And he played tremendously well. That was the one where Mugabe was sent off after about 2 seconds or whatever it was, something ridiculous anyway. And I thought at that time, watching the boy, I thought, do you know what? I could maybe see him, if he takes this role on properly, I could see him being the guy that might drag them up by the bootstraps. But it never happened. So, but I do think he's one for the future.
I'll keep an eye on the comments here. William Forbes again. Jack Ross let himself down by not making the right signing in the summer after finishing third. And he's also said, which I will touch on in a second, about Philip Cocu. And he's also said Hibs need another strong centre-half, a hard midfield player and a goal scoring forward, which I do agree with. But he has mentioned Philip Cocu, the ex-Holland legend. And I also saw as well today that Henning Berg has also thrown his name in the ring for the Hibs job. Again, I think Philip Cocu will be a really good appointment for Hibs. He's a very, very experienced coach. He's a fantastic player. So again, that's another potentially very good manager getting the Hibs job.
Yeah, but you know what? I tend to be quite cynical when all these kind of big names are getting thrown into the hat, as it were, whenever, especially when it's Scottish teams, because there is a kind of perceived attitude out with Scotland, that we're a bit of a diddy league, as we say here in the West. But I think people, if they come here, they learn very quickly that that's not the case. I don't know what Philip Cocu's demands, if you want, would be of the Hibs board, if he was going to take the job. But if it was me, I'd be looking for some sort of cast iron guarantee that, I'm going to get past 19 games.
Yeah, I mean, I just think if you look at that Hibs team, again, Rad Porteous, he's a decent enough player. But I do agree with what William said. They need a strong centre-half because for me, Rocky Bashiri isn't good enough. I think what really impressed me about Hibs in that semi-final was the fact that Lewis Stevenson played very well in that midfield role. And I do like the look of like Jake Doyle-Hayes, but I just think going forward, they looked very, very weak up there. And that's something that Hibs need to address, whoever gets the job. Yeah,
and the way that Sean Maloney wanted them to play, they were very slow, and it needed to be quicker. In the modern game, speed is of the essence, especially when teams are attacking and they want to control the ball. You just have to look at how Ange Postecoglou, changed a lumbering team like Celtic from the previous season into the team that they are now. And it's such a high intensity. Yes, it takes its toll on players. Of course it does. So you're going to need to have a big enough squad to cope with it, which obviously the likes of Celtic and Rangers would be able to. But if you're going to play that sort of game, then you have to play it properly. And you also have to have players that are able to do it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of admire Maloney in the fact that he had a style of play, what he try and play. He had a philosophy, but they tried to play it from the back. And I'm sorry, but you can't play it from the back with guys like Rocky Bashiri. He's not good enough. No. So I can understand having that philosophy. Now, I go back to Hearts. Now, I don't want to say that exactly the same, but I go back to Hearts and I look at like Ian Cathro. Now, Ian Cathro had no coaching. Well, he was obviously a coach, but he had no managerial experience. For me, that was a poor appointment. It didn't work. I could see what he was trying to do, but didn't have the players for it. And I think that's the same with Sean Maloney. So I think whoever gets that Hibs job, yes, have a philosophy, but you've got to have the right players to do it.
Absolutely. And even if, technically speaking, they're not those kind of players, they have to buy in to what the manager's doing and they've got to give their all for it. I mean, I watch a lot of football, right? Whether it's in Scotland or England or whatever it is. I mean, I've seen myself sitting up in the middle of the night and watching games from out of Mongolia and stuff like that, So I do watch a lot of football. And one thing that I do find, regardless of where the football is getting played, is from a fan's perspective, if the team is working hard, okay, you're going to get on their back if they're not winning the game. But afterwards, you're going to still feel proud that they've given everything in 90 minutes. And that's all we can ask football players to do, really, Winning the game is the bonus. If they put in the work, that's what we want.
More comments coming in here. William Forbes again. I think Ron will be sucked in by a big name. Cocu won the league in Holland 3 years out of 5. Gordon McIntosh says, hi guys, hope you're all good. We're all good. Gordon, thank you for joining us. Only as good as your last game podcast. I think I know who this is. Said, good listen, boys, and he thinks Rangers will go through. William Forbes again has said, I agree. Rocky Bashiri has tried his best, but we need better as Hanlon is getting on. Again, Paul Hanlon, a very experienced player, but I do think Hibs need a bit better. And I think for me, I don't know why I think this, but I actually do think Roy Keane will get that job. I don't know why I think that, but I just have a feeling that he will get it.
Well, he is kind of like out of left field a little bit, in terms of the fact that he's not managed for quite a lot of years, whereas probably the other names are guys that have been managing fairly recently. And that might be the thing that will turn it for them, for somebody like that to come in who perhaps hasn't or isn't jaded by, being constantly involved in football as a manager or a coach for 10 years. He might be fresher and it might work. But I would like to see Roy there as well. I must admit, I like Big Roy. Always have done.
If they don't give it to Roy Keane, they have got to give it to Craig Levein. Just saying.
Look, I know you're a Hearts man, right? Now, surely you don't want Hibs to die totally. Come on, what are you going to do on a derby day? Play yourself?
I just want them relegated for a season. Is that so bad? No, honestly, in all seriousness, I think Hibs needs a bit more experience. But I would have liked to see Maloney stay because I do think his philosophy, I could understand it. And I think he needed a transfer window, like a proper summer transfer window, get the players that he wanted, have a proper pre-season with them. But, it obviously just didn't happen. So whoever Hibs get in now is going to be so important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be the correct appointment this time round. And they've got to give him more than 19 games.
I think William gets my joke there about Craig Levein because he says we don't need any forwards. There you go.
Well, they don't have any forwards, so I think they do need them.
So let's now move on to the manager and player of the year. Now, the nominations came out this week. We'll look at the manager of the year first. So we've got Ange Postecoglou, we've got Robbie Neilson, only winner for me. We've got Malky Mackay, we've got Steve Clark, and we have Dick Campbell. Now, let's start with a manager whose team are currently top of the league. Now, James, I think it's fair to say that when the Eddie Howe deal to Celtic fell through, there was a lot of discontented voices saying, who's Ange Postecoglou? I don't think any Celtic fan or any fan of any club could have imagined just how good Ange Postecoglou was going to be for Celtic.
No, I don't think so. I would agree with you there. Although, what football supporters don't do, really, is when somebody gets an appointment and nobody really knows them, they don't really go and do a bit of research to find out anything they can about the person. They just automatically think, oh, he's going to be crap, Now, I already knew Postecoglou from his adventures with Australia, taking them to the Brazil World Cup finals. He took their under-19s to a World Cup final. He won titles in Australia. He won titles in Japan. Very, very well and highly respected coach in that part of the world. My only, wasn't really a concern as such, but my only thought was, can he cope with the pressure cooker that is Glasgow when you're when you're in charge of either Celtic or Rangers, because he probably hasn't come across that level of scrutiny before. But I think he stood up to it, and I must admit, I love whenever he's doing a press conference or he's been interviewed after a game because he's just so typical Australian, straight to the point.
I'll be honest, even as a Hearts fan, you get a lot of managers that are very hard to like. Ange Postecoglou's not that kind of guy. He's actually a guy you actually quite like watching and like listening to. He's very passionate. He's very knowledgeable. And I think as well, the fact that, as much as the players that he's brought in, guys like Maeda, guys like Hatate, guys like Kyogo, he's also brought the best out of players like Ralston, players like Greg Taylor, players like Rogic. So he's got the players to buy into his philosophy. And I think that speaks volumes for him, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think there would have been many Celtic supporters would have thought that Anthony Ralston would have been at Parkhead this season, if it wasn't Ange Postecoglou that had taken over, because he just seemed to be, he headed down a cul-de-sac and just didn't seem to be able to turn around to get back out again. Greg Taylor, sometimes I get very frustrated with Greg Taylor because you see him in games and he really goes for it and he's all heart. And then you see him in other games and he just seems to do some really stupid things, So he's quite a frustrating player. But they don't really have anybody to play that position. Obviously, you could, if Juranovic was fit, you could have Juranovic at left back and Ralston at right back. But Juranovic is more a right back than a left back. So that's why he will always get the nod in the right back position, when he's fit. Obviously, there's been a bit of talk about Celtic possibly signing some red-hot young Iranian left back. So I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. But I think Ange Postecoglou has been an absolute breath of fresh air, not just at Celtic Football Club, but at Scottish football as a whole.
Obviously, he's won the League Cup. He could potentially win the league. We'll get to that very shortly because could somebody be a potential title decider? Would you have expected that as a Celtic fan at the start of the season when Postecoglou came in, that you'd be in this position right now?
No. In all honesty, I would have been happy if they had won, say, the League Cup and finished second, but, with a much shorter goal difference and points margin compared to the previous season. For me, that would have been successful for them. And it didn't start well, let's be honest. It didn't start well. I mean, we went to Tynecastle, first game of the season, and literally got played off the park.
Yeah, that was fun.
And, the writing, for many people that I know, the writing was on the wall at that point, But he pulled it round, And then obviously it helped with the likes of Kyogo hitting the ground running, and literally being an absolute breath of fresh air. And then in January when Hatate and Maeda and Gucci came in, although Gucci's not really featured much, Hatate and Maeda again hit the ground running, and you're actually seeing it now with Hatate as well. He's obviously tiring later on in games, and I just sometimes think, you know what, you should maybe take him off earlier. Because the boy played a full season in Japan, mind you, and saying that, so did Maeda, and he still runs at 100 miles an hour for 90 minutes. So, what do I know?
Obviously, Celtic have had a lot of standouts this season. Who in particular has stood out for you?
If you think of the glory aspect, so by that I mean people scoring goals, then obviously Kyogo is the main man. But for me, I think Callum McGregor has been absolutely wonderful. I've always liked Callum McGregor. I've always felt he was a really good football player. I just had my doubts about whether or not he had it in him to really be the team captain. And especially when you think, taking over from Scott Brown, who was, snarling and spitting all the time, and not just at the opposition. So it was a bit of a, could this crush the lad? But I think he stepped up to the plate and he's been absolutely immense this season. Absolutely immense.
Yeah, and it's probably no surprise that he's been obviously nominated for one of the players of the season as well, along with Tom Rogic. But if we move on now to Robbie Neilson. Now, if somebody had said to me at the start of the season that Robbie Neilson would be in a cup final, he would have third place wrapped up, we'd have European football, and he would be a nomination for Manager of the Year, I would have laughed at you, because after last season, I was happy for him to go. But what an incredible turnaround he's had this season.
Absolutely. And again, it comes down to the recruitment, because he has brought in players. Obviously, he's brought in players that it didn't work, but he's also brought in players where it did work, and that laddie Sims, the last few games, he's been an absolute revelation to me. I really didn't think he had it in him, and it's a shame that, what's the other boy's name that got injured? Beningame.
Yeah.
It's a real shame that he got injured because I think, from my perspective, I think he could have probably been in there as Player of the Year as well because he was absolutely immense.
Yeah, I mean, I think every fan of every club would agree with us that if you get recruitment right, it is such a massive thing. And the last few seasons, Hearts haven't got it right. Yeah. This season, it's been absolutely bang on. Benny Maringame, Cammy Devlin, Ellis Sims, Nathaniel Atkinson, Alec Cochrane, they've all been brilliant. But for me, listen, as well as Craig Gordon's been outstanding, for me, the best signing we've made is Barry Mackay. I just think he's been absolutely phenomenal for Hearts.
Yeah. One of the things that surprised me was the fact that he didn't take off when he went south. Because, I remember him as a young player, and when he was at Rangers and stuff like that, and he always showed that he had it. And when he got the move down south, I really thought he would take off, but it didn't work out. For whatever reason, it didn't work out. And obviously, Hearts are benefiting from that now because since he's come in, he has been a revelation for Hearts. But, thinking about the recruitment aspect, I think as well, to a certain extent, when they came up after being down, in the Championship, when Hearts came back up, they were still very much in flux. And possibly it was difficult to, recruit players that would have taken them forward. And it's maybe just taking that time for that to happen. And obviously it's clicked this season, and hopefully going forward, it will continue and be built upon.
Yeah, last season, we're in the Championship. There was a lot of very poor games in there. I know a lot of folks said it's about getting up, which, yes, it was. But we had the disappointments of the Cups against Alloa and obviously the humiliation against Brora. And there was a lot of Hearts fans, myself included, I'm not going to lie, that would have been quite happy for Robbie Neilson to go. So what he's done this season to turn this round, and Joe Savage as well, he's been brilliant for recruitment-wise. Yeah. And I think, listen, I don't think Robbie will win Manager of the Year, but I think he is absolutely deserving to be in that list.
Oh, absolutely. I have to agree with you. I might be wrong with this, but I think it's kind of like nailed on. I think Ange Postecoglou will be the Manager of the Year. But as we said before we went on air, we were talking about, Van Bronckhorst not being on that list. And as I said to you at the time, who would have been taken away from that list if Van Bronckhorst had gone in? And it would probably have been Dick Campbell. And that, to me, is an absolute travesty because that man has worked miracles with Arbroath when you consider they're a part-time team. And let's work to the assumption that they get into the Premier League next year. They're still going to be a part-time team, which will probably create a lot of problems for them, unfortunately.
Yeah, that brings me on nicely there. Well done. That was a good segue there. Dick Campbell, as you said, is also on the list. Now, I'll admit, I was gutted for them last week when they played Kilmarnock. I actually thought they were going to do it. They still have a chance. They can still get through the playoff. They play tonight against Morton. They're already guaranteed the playoff place anyway. What an achievement it would be if Arbroath, little part-time Arbroath, get up to the Premiership next season. It would just be absolutely sensational.
Well, do you know what? I'm of a generation, Graham. I can remember Arbroath and teams like them being in the First Division and regularly competing against the likes of Hearts and Celtic and Rangers. And obviously, I suppose probably from around about the 1970s onwards, those teams that predominantly were provincial and predominantly were part-time really started to fall behind, and the big boys that were playing, full-time players, they really started to canter forward. And I would love to see teams like Arbroath getting into the likes of the Premier League and stuff like that. Yeah, they might only last a season, but do you know what? I think they'll be a breath of fresh air.
That's a good point, actually, because I've heard a lot of folks saying that if Arbroath come up to the Premier League, it'll be an embarrassment. They'll just go straight back down. Listen, I think Arbroath will give quite a few folk a good game, especially at Gayfield. That's not an easy place to go. Now, they played Hibs in the Scottish Cup. Yes, Hibs won. But I thought Arbroath, made a good account of themselves. So I think they'll give a lot of teams a very hard game.
They're a very difficult team to play against. Obviously, we don't see a lot of that level of football, unfortunately, on TV. You have to actually physically go to the games, really. But anytime I've seen them on television, I've always been impressed by them. And I thought, like yourself, last week they were going to turn Kilmarnock over. I really did think that was going to happen. And I was gutted for Arbroath and it didn't happen. I really was, because it would have been just so wonderful. But, as you say, they're getting into the playoffs, and I do think they'll be in the Premier League next year.
I mean, if they do, obviously, they finish second, they've obviously got to play the team that finishes third and fourth. But if they won that, let's say they potentially play, well, they will obviously play either Dundee or St Johnstone. I think over 2 legs, Arbroath will fancy that.
Oh, aye, absolutely. And if it's Dundee, they'll probably fancy it more than if it's St Johnstone. And again, I'm not being disparaging to Dundee, but Dundee have been rank rotten this season. St Johnstone have kind of pulled themselves up a little bit after a terrible start. But, I mean, no, I think Arbroath are definitely going to be in the Premier League. And I don't really mind who they take the place of.
I will say, if there's a moment of the season this season, it has to go to Charlie Adam for that ridiculous dive last week, which has been like everywhere. I don't know what he was doing, but that was honestly one of the funniest things I've ever seen. It was so funny.
Do you know, it's funny you say that, because somebody had mentioned that to me and I hadn't seen it. Honestly, I hadn't seen it. And I only saw it yesterday. So, I'm way behind the curve. But like yourself, I was waiting for somebody to come onto the pitch and hold up some cards,
He's even said that his own kids have wound him up about it. I mean, it's not like it was even in the penalty box. It was outside the box. It's like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Honestly, it was so funny.
I think it was his age caught up with him and he just fell over personally. But
very possibly. A big gust of wind must have blown him over. But I mean, I just think, I loved Dick Campbell. I think he's such a passionate guy, such a great guy, and just seeing him in the Premier League, it would be so good to see him in there. And I think, as I said, I think they could do it. I really do.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I do believe they're going to be in the Premier League next year, and I look forward to them being in the Premier League next year.
Let's move on to another man who is in the Premier League, and it's Malky Mackay, who's on the list, the Ross County manager. Now, again, I didn't at the time think it was a good appointment, but I have to be honest, it's worked very well. Ross County have had a very good season. They could potentially still get European football. So again, what a job Malky Mackay's done.
Absolutely. And again, it's one of those strange things, because he had been out of football for a while and then he got the job at Ross County, and it didn't start well. But he kept, doing what he was doing and working with the players, and it started to come together. And when they played Celtic last weekend, it was a nervy game from a Celtic supporter's point of view. It really was a nervy game. And they probably deserved to, maybe get a draw out of that game, over the course of the 90 minutes. But again, it never harmed them, which was good from their point of view, because they still have a couple of games left in which they can secure potentially the European football. And that would be great for Dingwall. It really would. Mind you, there's a lot of people who won't know where the hell Dingwall is, especially from the continent. There's a lot of people in Scotland don't know where it is.
I know. I mean, I think, you know what? I think you've got to be honest as well that at the start of the season, I didn't really know what to expect with Ross County. Obviously, one of the players in their team, Reagan Charles Cook, has had a fantastic season. But I think Malky Mackay, we talk about Sean Maloney trying to get a philosophy, and I think Malky Mackay has got a philosophy he wants to play, and it has worked. And you said yourself, Dingwall is a very, very hard place to go.
Oh, it's an absolute... I mean, it's quite hard to get to. You know what I mean? It's a long journey. If you're a team down in the Central Belt, it's a long old journey to get there. But by the same token, it's a long old journey for their fans to come down and play, in Edinburgh or Glasgow or whatever it is. But it's a tight ground. I don't know if you've been to Ross County's ground. It's a tight ground, and I like it because of that. It's like I like Tynecastle because it's a tight ground. Oh, hello.
My son's interrupted the broadcast there, but he's gone away. Have a good time. That's what happens when you get live.
Do you know what, Graham? I actually thought he was the sub that was coming on and you were getting taken off. To
be honest, it might well be. You never know. I've injured myself.
I've got a sore throat, I can't carry on. But no, Malky Mackay has done a tremendous job. And it kind of makes me think he wasn't the greatest football player, Malky Mackay. He was decent, but he wasn't the greatest. But he's better as a manager, I think, than he was as a player. Sean Maloney, on the other hand, was an absolutely fantastic football player, but on the face of what's happened recently, doesn't seem to have it to be a manager. So perhaps there is a bit of an element of truth in that. That not very good players go on and make great managers.
I'm going to throw this at you.
Oh.
Do you think that Hibs would potentially go for Malky Mackay as new manager?
I did see his name being mentioned right at the start, after Sean Maloney went. No, I don't think so. Partly because I don't think Hibs would go for him, but partly because I think Malky Mackay feels he's got something going up at Ross County and he wants to see how far he can take it.
Yeah, I think it was a name I saw mentioned earlier as well, so I just thought I'd throw that out there, but I think you're right. Let's go to the final name on the list. Now, we've said before on the show, myself, you, Michael, we've all said that in the past, watching Scotland it's not been great, but Steve Clarke has had Scotland at the Euros, and he is on the verge of getting us to the World Cup. Again, we talk about managers that have done a great job. What a job Steve Clarke's done for the national team.
Yeah, and I suppose to a certain extent, I don't really think an international manager should be considered in that respect. Because I think the manager of the year, the consideration for that should be how well a manager's done over the course of a proper season. And yeah, I'm sure Steve Clarke does a lot of stuff in the background, when they're not together with the squad and they're not playing games. But you don't see that. Whereas you see, week in, week out, you see the guys that are at club managers, what they're doing, what they're getting right, what they're getting wrong, even. But again, if he was to get the award, I wouldn't begrudge him it because he has done very well. He's done better than I thought he would do. I'll say that much. When he got the Scotland job, I thought, oh, here we go. Another one. But he has done better than I expected.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of got that club camaraderie. We spoke as well about the fact that for so long we've had players that have pulled out of national squads. They don't want to be there. That's not happening under Steve Clarke now. Players want to be there. And I think that's great as well for the national team.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? I personally think that as a professional footballer, if you get picked for your national team, regardless of who the opposition is, you should go. Unless there is a genuine injury reason for you not going, you should be there. We now have guys turning up for the squads who maybe think to themselves, you know what, I don't think I'm going to get a game, but I'm here, I'm in the group, and if something happens, there's always that possibility. And that's the kind of mentality I think you need from a national team.
I know we've still got a few weeks, well, more than a few weeks left yet, but did you think that the Scotland-Ukraine game would go ahead? Because I genuinely didn't.
I didn't, and I'm still slightly dubious, although it seems to be that everything's in place for it to happen. But let's be honest, Ukraine, they're still in a war. Anything could happen. I actually thought there was a suggestion put out that what they should have done was put Ukraine in to the World Cup draw and just had that game between Scotland and either Austria or Wales, as it is now, for a final place, as it were, because Russia are not going to be at the World Cup, because they've been sanctioned, so that takes them out of there. So why not give Ukraine, that spot, But if under normal circumstances we played them, I would say it would be a very, very difficult game. Based on how things are at the moment, I think it might be harder for the Ukrainian players to concentrate than it would be for the Scotland players. But But I'm a pessimist when it comes to Scotland national team, and I until that final whistle goes on the game that gets them to the World Cup finals, I'm afraid I'm not going to hang my hat on them getting there.
Hi to our good friend Michael McEwen, who says, "Hi, guy, good show." Of course it is. You've got the two best hosts here. How can it not be? I'm only joking, mate. I'm only joking.
No, I'm not.
But I will say as well, like, if Ukraine were playing anybody else, I would want them to win. But I think it's going to be like that. I think every other fan of every other nation will want Ukraine to win this.
Yeah.
But because it's Scotland, I want Scotland to win.
Well, I mean, it's a bit like, you know, if you're a Hearts fan or a Celtic fan or a Rangers fan, you always want your club to do well. And I've always wanted Scotland to do well. You know, and I used to go to lots and lots of Scotland games when, you know, we weren't doing well. But I still went, turned up week in, week out. Through the bad years, when I was following Celtic, I still went when things weren't going well. You know, so I think as a supporter, you have to support your team, whether that's a national team or a club team, you have to support them. And I don't agree with this thing about booing players of your team. You know, I've never booed a player in my life unless he's on the opposite side.
To anybody watching this show tonight, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to put this to James now. Who is the best player you have ever seen playing for Scotland?
Ooh. I would have to say, just purely because of the amount of time that he played for Scotland, I would have to say Dennis Law, the lawman. The best player not to have played a lot for Scotland, Jinky Johnson.
Yeah, I'm going to go for Craig Gordon because I'm biased. I'm joking. No, but I think...
I thought you were going to say Craig Levine there.
Even I'm not that biased. I couldn't do that. But no, I mean, I just love watching Scotland just now. You know, me and Michael have spoken about this on the show before, that I now get a buzz watching Scotland, and a lot of that is down to Steve Clarke and the winning mentality he's got in that team. And I think if we can get to World Cup, I mean, on the back of Euros, that would be absolutely sensational.
Oh, it would be absolutely wonderful, you know. Obviously, getting to the Euros was great because it was such a long time since Scotland had been at a major tournament. And if they managed to get to two back-to-back, you know, just thinking back over the last 20 years or so, it's a huge achievement. And as you say, it's good watching Scotland playing now because they've got lots of, not necessarily world-class players or world beaters, but they've got a group of players there who are going to fight for each other and fight for the team and the country. And that's, as I said before, that's all the supporters we can ask.
We've got a message here to say Kenny Dalglish, best Scottish player ever. I can't disagree with that. What I will say is as well, talking about Scotland, because we're talking about Steve Clarke. See, when I look at that Scotland midfield, now you've obviously seen Scotland a lot more than I have, but see if you look at that Scotland midfield of McGinn, Gilmore and McGregor, that is an absolutely fantastic midfield.
It is. It's the best midfield for quite a long time, I think. We've had better midfields in the past. I'm thinking back in '98, when we had the likes of John Collins and people like that, and before that, when we had the likes of Graham Souness in the midfield. You know, even going further back in that with the likes of Bertie Auld and players like that. You know, we've had better players and better midfields. But for a long time, quite apart from the fact that we couldn't score goals, for a long time, Scotland as a team were soft. And they're not soft anymore because they're willing to work and fight for each other. And I just love watching John McGinn play. You know, he just doesn't seem to know when to give up.
I think, to be fair, McGinn's backside is worth about 25 million. I mean, seriously, what a backside that is. But no, I mean, I think, honestly, that midfield, I just love it. I think Billy Gilmore, for his age, is just such a talented midfielder. I can't believe he hasn't been breaking into that Norwich team a lot quicker because he's just a fantastic player.
Well, that's certainly one of the anomalies, isn't it, of the last season? Why, you know, he's not got there. I know that he did kind of pick up an injury or two, but as a fit player, for me, I think he should be walking. To be honest, I think he should walk into Chelsea's midfield because I think he's good enough.
Yeah, I completely agree. So let's put it out there. I'm going to ask you, I'm going to ask all the viewers that are watching this. Again, thank you for everyone that's watching and keep the comments coming. Who do you think will win the Manager of the Year award?
I think it's going to be Ange Postecoglou. I'd be very surprised if it's anyone else, just purely because of, he did turn what was effectively an overweight, lumbering team who were going nowhere, and he's turned them into potential Premier League champions. They've already won the League Cup, as we said. But for a pretty poor performance last weekend, they probably could have been going for the treble. But it's probably more important that they get the league. Certainly, as a Celtic supporter, I think it's more important to get the league. Don't really care about cups, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, Gordon McIntosh as well says probably Angie, but Dick deserves also. I can't disagree with that.
No.
Let's move on to the Player of the Year awards. Player of the season. Now we've got Callum McGregor, we've got Tom Rogic, we've got Craig Gordon, and we've got Regan Charles Cook. There's only one winner, isn't there? It's Craig Gordon.
Well, do you know what? I was just about to say that it's probably going to be a toss between Gordon and McGregor. Because although they're different players and they play in different positions, I think they've both been absolutely immense this season. And it probably one of the biggest mistakes that was ever made by Celtic was letting Craig Gordon go, if I'm being honest. I've always liked him. I've always thought he was a fantastic goalkeeper. And he just seems to be getting better and better, even though he's getting older and towards the end of his career. He just does seem to be getting better. Purely from a selfish point of view, I think it will be Callum McGregor. But I wouldn't be disappointed in any of those players winning that, if I'm being honest.
I think if you look at the Celtic pair, McGregor and Rogic, we spoke earlier on about the fact that, Tom Rogic has had a new lease of life under Postecoglou. He really actually dominates games. We all know the ability he's got, but he seems to have stepped up a level.
Yeah, and I think, again, it is probably down to, the manager knowing him so well, because obviously he's coached him when he was younger, and then he's coached him, when he's played for the Australian national team. And he did seem to be, again, sort of he'd gone down a cul-de-sac and couldn't find his way back out. And it did look, certainly last year, it did kind of look as if he was going to be heading off to pastures new. But I'm quite happy that he didn't. I've always been a huge fan of Tom Rogic. I think he's an absolutely sublime player to watch. And sometimes when you're watching him, you just think, how did he do that? He's just got such a wonderful touch. But in saying that, as I said, I think any of the players that are listed could be well-deserved winners. And I must say, Regan Charles Cook has been an absolute revelation. Because, let's be honest, nobody knew who he was at the start of the season. But lots of people are talking about him now.
100%. And if you look at Callum McGregor as well, once Scott Brown left Celtic, who was going to step up into that kind of leadership role? And I think you have to say that Callum McGregor has more than stepped into that role.
Absolutely. I did think that it might be too much for him. I remember a couple of times when he stood in as captain, when Scott Brown was there, it seemed as if it was overwhelming him. But he's definitely taken it on. He's grabbed the bull by the horns, as the saying goes, and he's just an absolutely fantastic captain for Celtic, on the field and off the field. And I don't think I've heard anybody who has a bad word to say about him.
Yeah, I mean, I think even as a Hearts fan watching McGregor, he's a very, very good player. He dictates the game. He's very composed in the ball. He makes the right pass. And as well, it's not just that, but we mentioned it earlier. You look at his form as well for Scotland in that midfield. I just think he's a very, very important player.
Yeah, and he's coming into possibly the best years of his career, from, a playing perspective. And I'm just glad, as I said, because it looked as if he might leave Celtic last season as well. And I think Celtic as a football team would have been much poorer if that had happened.
Now, Earlier on this week, Hearts had posted out about the Player of the Season award for Hearts. Craig Gordon was at the top of that list. He's on this list as well. Now, Craig Gordon's 39-year-old. You've mentioned earlier the fact that Celtic let him go. Your loss is 100% our gain, because what an absolutely magnificent season he's had. And again, I could go back to numerous saves that he's made this season, but if I look back at that semi-final game 2 weeks ago, that save from Ryan Porteous was incredible. He touches on it at the post, the ball bounces back. What an unbelievable save.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he is undoubtedly a world-class goalkeeper. And I think it's all the more great because, let's be honest, he did have a horrendous injury, and it did look as if, he was going to be out of the game for good. However, he came back, and I have to take my hat off to the people at Celtic at that point when they brought him in, because, it was a bit of a gamble, but by God, it paid off. And, now Hearts are benefiting from him again, because he was a great goalkeeper the first time he was there, and he's probably a better goalkeeper now.
It was. I mean, I've seen some really good goalkeepers at Hearts, like Henry Smith. We've had like Niemi and guys like that. But for me, Craig Gordon is absolutely top of that list. He's just been fantastic since he came back. And I cannot... The last few seasons, we've had like guys like Joe Pereira, we've had Bobby's Lamal, we've had Colin Doyle, who were just absolutely hopeless. And I cannot stress enough how important it is to have a good goalkeeper. Celtic have got that now with Joe Hart. Having a good goalkeeper is so important.
Yeah. And I think it might be a bit of an old-fashioned view, I don't know, but I've always felt that a team's confidence comes from the back. If you've got somebody good between the sticks, the guys in front of him are confident in that, and then that moves forward to the people in the midfield. They're confident in the guys behind them, and so on and so forth. And then obviously, if you've got somebody who can put the ball in the back of the net, then everybody's going to be very confident in them. And Celtic have got that in spades at the moment.
Time is flying. We are an hour and 6 minutes into the show. Really enjoying it so far, and it's thank you to James for joining me. I would like to ask, though, is there anyone that isn't on that list for Player of the Season that you think should be? Doesn't have to be Celtic, could be anybody from any team. Is there anyone there that's missing that you think should be with a chance?
This is probably going to be a wee bit controversial, but I would think possibly Tavernier. Obviously he won it last year. I think he's had a good, solid season for Rangers, even when they've not been playing particularly well. I mean, he's had some issues this season, but who doesn't? And also, we talked about him earlier, Barry Mackay. I thought, he might be in there with a shout, being given an honourable mention at the very least.
Yeah, and I'm just hearing in my ear, actually, penalty Rangers. Now you mentioned Tavernier. That's just something hearing there.
And who's the ref that gave it? Let's not get down that particular rabbit hole.
I wouldn't like to say. I'll be like Chris Kamara and say, "Unbelievable, Jeff. I missed that." But yeah, I mean, I have to admit, I think Barry Mackay should be on that list, because he's honestly has been brilliant for Hearts this season. But let's look at the games this weekend. Now, we'll start with Sunday, because I've put at the bottom of the screen here, is Celtic against Rangers a potential title decider? James, what do you think?
Yes.
Well, that was
in a word, yes. Even if, Rangers were to win, or, it was a draw, Celtic are still too far ahead, especially with goal difference, for them to completely lose the plot. I think that possibly Rangers, although they will try their best, I think Rangers will probably be thinking, let's go for the Scottish Cup and let's go for the Europa Cup. And I think they may take their foot off the gas ever so slightly. But I don't think it would be a case that they would turn up on Sunday and they just, as a team, they just would not perform. I think they're professional players. They've got pride in what they do. So therefore, I think they will do their best. But I think Celtic will win it. And I think it will probably be 2-1 to Celtic, with Kyogo scoring both goals.
You said earlier that you kind of, we mentioned Rangers in Europe and the fact that would they be tired for the Scottish Cup game? And that didn't prove to be the case. Are you expecting this might happen on Sunday after the game last night?
No, in all honesty, I don't. I think any derby game, if you can't, get your levels raised for a derby game, you shouldn't be there. Because you're playing your greatest rivals, and we could go down the rabbit hole of what happened to Rangers in the past and all the rest of it. And I'm not going to go down that particular route. I just think it's a nonsense the way people go on about it. It is still a huge rivalry. And if you can't get yourself up for playing in those games, then you shouldn't be there. And I think the Rangers players will be up for it. Again, it will depend on who is available to play. I don't know if anybody got any niggles or, anything like that from the game last night. There was some talk after the game, possibly that Roof might be available for selection again, and possibly Ramsey, which will be good from a Rangers point of view, if that's the case. However, if they're not there, again, who's going to kind of step in to be the man to score the goals for them?
Yeah, I mean, the last time Celtic played Rangers at Celtic Park, Celtic started that game like an absolute freight train. I mean, they were on the front foot right from the off. Do you think Postecoglou will be looking for Celtic to do the same again?
Yeah, because I think he expects them to do that every game, and to be fair, most games that's how they do go, and sometimes it's a bit like they've kind of tired themselves out, as we get into the second half, because the levels drop, and that's understandable because they play at such a high intensity. But yeah, if they barrel over the top of Rangers and get a couple of goals in that first half, I think it would be very, very difficult for Rangers to recover from that.
If you're Postecoglou, especially in the forward areas, what do you do? Do you start Kyogo? I mean, I don't know if he's back, but Giakoumakis for me has been very impressive when he has played. So do you think he will start Kyogo on Sunday?
Yes, I think he will, because I think even though Giakoumakis has done very, very well and since he started scoring goals, I think Kyogo is well regarded as being the number one striker. And obviously, if that's the case, then he's the guy that should be, getting the jersey. Obviously, Giakoumakis was on the bench last weekend and he did come on. But ultimately, rustiness or whatever, it just wasn't to be for him on Sunday of last week. He'll definitely get a turnout this Sunday as well. But I do think that it'll be Kyogo up front. I think the front three will be the same as at Hampden last weekend, Maeda, Jota and Kyogo.
You've mentioned him. I just want to talk about him for a wee while because, honestly, watching Celtic, the one player that I really, really like is Maeda. Now, it's not just what he does on the ball. His work rate off the ball is unbelievable. The tracking back he does, the pressing he does. And I think if you're a Celtic teammate and you're watching that, you must be thinking, this boy never stops. It's brilliant. And that's what Postecoglou wants. I just think you just watch Maeda and he is such a very, very good player to have on your team.
Well, do you know what? I keep on looking at to see who his sponsor is on his shirt. I think he might have a personal sponsor who's Duracell. But he's so fast that we can't catch it. But no, when you think he had a full season in Japan, right, and he's come here and he's literally hit the ground running, and he keeps going and keeps going. And we were talking about it earlier. Hatate was the same, when he came in January, hit the ground running, doing fantastically well. But you can see he's tiring in games a little bit. Whereas I don't know what it is about Maeda. But he just keeps going and going and going. And he never ever seems to get that tired. And he's just, I love watching him, I just love watching him because he's got such a great work rate. And he's given absolutely everything.
You mentioned Hatate. Now, obviously, we know that the last time Celtic played Rangers, Hatate scored twice in that game. And he was a very, very good player. Do you think his form has dropped off a little bit recently because he hasn't looked the same kind of player?
As I said, I think he has kind of got tired. Again, coming off of a full season in Japan, and then obviously he got picked for the Japan national squad for a couple of the last World Cup games there. He didn't play in one, but he came on in the other. And obviously there's a lot of travelling involved, because they're going to the other side of the world with those teams. I think, although I don't see him getting rested until the end of the season, but I do feel sometimes when I'm watching them, that maybe halfway through the second half, it would be a good point to, bring somebody else in. And I'd like to see Ideguchi getting more of a chance, because I've seen him playing and he's a terrific player. He just needs to get that opportunity. But that midfield is very, very difficult to break into.
Yeah, in terms of looking at Rangers team, I think I've said numerous times in the show again that I think Ryan Kent potentially has the talent to be a very, very good player. He could be a massive threat for Rangers. But again, you talked about him earlier on. I think Joe Aribo could be a real threat on Sunday.
Yeah. As I said, I mean, I've always liked Joe Aribo. Even before he came up to play for Rangers, I liked watching him playing. Ryan Kent, again, yeah, super, super player. But he's a little bit, when he's on his game, he's absolutely superb. But sometimes, he turns up at matches and he just doesn't play the way that he can play. Like last night, he was absolutely on fire last night. And possibly Rangers should have had a goal from, the shot come cross from Kent that fizzed across the goal, and Tavernier couldn't quite get to the end of it. I would not have been disappointed if Kent had got that into the goal himself without anybody else getting a touch on it, because it was a terrific move for him to get there and then, fire that ball across. But he was up for it last night. Will he be up for it on Sunday? He's not got Scott Brown against him, so maybe the red mist won't be there as much as it has been in the past.
One player I want to touch on as well is Aaron Ramsey. Now, when he signed for Rangers, there was a big fanfare. It was on Sky Sports News, his massive signing. Now, he has had his injury problems, and it hasn't really worked out the way that Rangers would have wanted it to. If he does play on Sunday, could he be a potential match winner for Rangers?
Absolutely. He's that quality of player, and he always has been. He has probably been a little bit of a disappointment since he's turned up, because he has picked up a couple of injuries. Now, whether they're fresh injuries or it's an aggravation of, an older injury, we don't really know, because nobody said anything. But, I mean, when he came here, he hadn't played for a very, very long time. So it was going to take him time to get up to speed. And it did look as if he had kind of got there. Then he picked up an injury and he was out for a week or two. And then he came in. And, of course, the last game at Ibrox, when he scored the opening goal for Rangers, and then obviously he had to go off because of an injury as well. That was probably a good thing from a Celtic's point of view, that he went off, because he was absolutely on fire that day. And probably may have, inspired them onto a victory.
Let's go prediction for Sunday. Celtic against Rangers. James, what's your thoughts? What's your prediction for this one?
2-1 to Celtic and Kyogo for both goals.
I think I'm going to go 2-1 as well. I think it'll be tight, but I do think Celtic will win this, and I do think they will end up winning the league, which, again, I think for Postecoglou's first season in charge would be quite incredible, to be honest.
Absolutely. It'll be huge for him.
Let's move on to the games tomorrow. Now, I generally don't know about this game. Aberdeen against Dundee, two teams that have had a very poor season, let's be honest. I don't know how this game is going to go.
Well, it is one of those games where it probably could go either way. It could be Aberdeen running riot and scoring a handful of goals, or it could be Dundee doing the exact same thing, or it could be the biggest boring game ever to have been played in the history of the world ever. They're both pretty bad, let's be honest. Although Aberdeen are probably just slightly better than Dundee. I thought they would have done a lot better when Jim Goodwin got the job, the manager's job there. I honestly did think, he would very quickly turn it around. I don't know why it's not happened, but I think there's possibly a feeling maybe within Aberdeen Football Club, not so much the supporters, but within the club itself, I think there's probably a feeling that let's just get this season over and done with, stay in the Premier League and look to build and move forward next time.
I think Jim Goodwin's a good manager. I think he's proved that at St Mirren when he was at Alloa. I think he's done a really good job. But I think in terms of Aberdeen, I mean, they're 9th in the league. Aberdeen should not be 9th in the league. They've had such a poor season.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, if you were to think on it from a historical perspective, right, you would say that the top 6 in the Scottish top division should be Celtic, Rangers, Aberdeen, Hearts, possibly Hibs, Dundee United, and anybody else out of the rest of them probably could fall into that bracket, on a good year. Because they historically have been the teams who have always been at the top end, if you like. So when one of them slips backwards, it is a big shock. I mean, it happened when Hibs got relegated. It was a major shock. When Hearts went down, it was a major shock. Obviously, Rangers went down, but for different reasons. But it was still a shock to the system that they weren't there in the top division anymore. So, historically, these are the teams that you would expect to see there or thereabouts. And yeah, Aberdeen being at that part of the table, I just can't understand why.
We talk about experiments in managerial terms, and Stephen Glass, I think we have to be honest, it was a failed experiment. Is it potential the fact that they maybe, we had Dave Cormack on the radio, he went on Sportsound and obviously backed his manager, which is fine. Owners are going to do that. And for a little bit, it kind of worked. But the Stephen Glass experiment, it just didn't work.
Yeah, I mean, again, that kind of comes back to that question, about good football players. Do they make good managers, coaches? Stephen Glass was a wonderful player. I don't think anybody would argue with that. And he certainly seemed to do well when he was over in America managing. But possibly the pressure of the expectations of, Aberdeen, because they're a big club, may have just been a bit too much for him. And I think they made some bad choices with players that they signed. To this day, I still don't know why J. Emmanuel Thomas was ever signed by Aberdeen. Don't get me wrong, he done well at Livingston. Do you know what I mean? He did, but nah, I'm sorry. He's not of the quality that Aberdeen needed.
Yeah, the jet didn't really take off, did it?
Well, do you know what? I don't even think anybody get near it with fuel. So there you go.
And I think it's fair to say the Glass experiment was shattered.
Oh,
I've got a lot more of them.
God, no.
I know, I'm a pain, am I? There you go, another one. Right, let's move on to Dundee. Now, again, when James McPake was sacked, he was having a bit of a good run. They beat Hearts in the league. I didn't expect that, I'll be honest. They then beat Peterhead, and you're thinking, right, he's turned them around. Then he gets sacked, and they bring in Mark McGee. And I think it's fair to say that hasn't worked either.
No. Again, I think that was probably a bit of an knee-jerk reaction, getting rid of James McPake, because, as you say, it did look on the face of it that he had kind of turned things round after a very, very rocky period. I think Mark McGee was brought in because historically he has a reputation for saving teams. But I don't even think CPR would bring Dundee back at this point. Not even a heart transplant.
It doesn't seem to like mobile phones a lot, does he? Every time he gets a mobile on his face, he kind of freaks out a little bit. I don't know what it is with that.
I did see something recently as well, apparently, and I hoped, part of the reason why I hope that they don't do well going forward between now and the end of the season, because apparently he said that if they win, and I think it's the Aberdeen game he was talking about, he's going to go about for a week with no clothes on, and I'm sorry, I couldn't bide that.
Yeah, the whole of Scotland were delighted they didn't win that game. It was a game against St Johnstone last week. So yeah, the whole of Scotland was right behind St Johnstone for that because nobody wants to see that. Let's be honest. But I think as well, you look at Dundee. They've got Charlie Adam. They've got plenty of experience in that team. They've got like Paul McGowan. They've had experienced players in that team, but for some reason, whether it's they've not gelled, whether it's been bad luck. But I've watched Dundee a few times, and defensively, they are all over the place, and it's going to be absolutely no surprise if they go down. And to be honest, I've seen this numerous times before. If Dundee go down, you look at that Championship league at the moment, they might still get back up again for a while.
Yeah, they certainly have been very, very poor defensively. And I must admit, when Lee Griffiths went there, I thought him and Jason Cummins could potentially become a very, very potent strike force. For whatever reason, it never worked out, and they're both gone now. And I did see something recently where apparently Jason Cummings is considering changing his allegiance and playing for the Australian national team. Who knows? But yeah, defensively, very, very poor. And you think back to a few seasons ago when Dundee, had quite a good defence. They still weren't going to be like winning championships or anything like that, but they were certainly a lot tighter defensively. And I'm surprised that the boy Kerr is still at Dundee. I thought he would have been snapped up by somebody else a while ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know it is between Dundee and St Johnstone for that, obviously, last place. Do you think it is going to be Dundee that are going to go straight down?
I think so. I don't see anything within the Dundee team or the current setup as it is at the moment that would save them from being the automatic drop. I think St Johnstone are kind of getting their act together, albeit too late, but they'll probably have to go through the playoffs. And as we know from the last few seasons, the playoffs is just a lottery. It really is, because when Dundee United and St Mirren played a couple of seasons ago in the playoff, it was one of the best games of football I had watched for a long time because you could see that both teams had the desire, that they wanted to be at the top table. And I'm sure that will happen again, but I kind of hope it's going to be Arbroath.
Yeah, honestly, I've said before, I think Arbroath will come up, and I really would love it to see it. But in terms of predictions for tomorrow, what do you think Aberdeen Livingston? Aberdeen Dundee, sorry.
I was going to say, my head says Aberdeen to win, but I think it will be a draw. Really, I really do think. My heart says an Aberdeen win, but my head tells me it'll be a draw.
I'm going to go. I think it'll be very tight. I'm going to go 1-0 Aberdeen. I don't see there being a lot of goals in this, which means it'll probably be a 5-5 thriller. No math predictions in the past.
I know I've made quite a few bob on your predictions, mate.
I'm glad somebody has because I'm winning nothing. Let's move on to Livingston against Hibs. Livingston in 8th, Hibs in 7th. Again, a very difficult game to call, but there's really nothing riding on this game. Both teams are pretty much safe. There's nothing really to play for. So what do you think will happen in this game?
That is what I would refer to as a banana skin game for both teams. I think Hibs will win it just purely because they seem to have a bit of a bounce effect going on at the moment with is it David Gray?
That is, yeah.
I couldn't remember if his first name was David or not. An interim charge. I think it will be probably 1-0 to Hibs.
I'm going 6-0 Livingston. No, I'm joking. I think, again, Livingston have a decent season. They're a bit up and down, and we always talk about this. But that pitch can be a leveller. I think David Martindale's done a very good job at Livingston. So, again, I can see this being a difficult game, but if Hibs can get there's only a few games left, but if Hibs can get a bit of a run of games together where they win, they obviously won last week, they might get a bit of confidence back. And obviously, any potential new manager will be watching to see what they've got in that team. So I think if you're Hibs, you're going to give everything to this game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, plus, let's be honest, these players are going to be playing for their futures. For whoever comes in as the manager, it might be a bit safer if David Gray got the job full time, which I don't think will happen. But if it's going to be somebody new, so a Roy Keane or a Philip Cocu, if it's somebody like that that's going to come in, a lot of these players are going to be thinking to themselves, I'm going to have to up my game, in the last few games of the season to try and impress X and keep me in the team.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a potentially very difficult game. I don't know what kind of crowd we'll get tomorrow, but I think, I actually think Hibs, I agree, I think Hibs might win this. I'm going to go 2-1 to Hibs, I think.
It'll be a tight game, absolutely. But as I say, I think 1-0 Hibs.
Let's go to the Battle of the Sainties in Perth. It is St Johnstone against St Mirren. St Johnstone are 11th, St Mirren are in 10th. Again, this is a really big game for St Johnstone. If they can get 3 points tomorrow, it kind of gives them a little bit more confidence to get away for that relegation playoff. But again, another very potentially tight game, I think, tomorrow.
Absolutely. It's quite a hard one to call. St Mirren were doing pretty well early on in the season. Kind of went backwards a little bit. Didn't really get that bounce effect, when Stephen Robinson came in as the new man, which you often get with football clubs. Yeah, hard one to call. I think St Johnstone will shade it, probably 2-1.
I've said before, and folk can comment on this if they want, I've said before as well that I don't think that new manager bounce thing is actually really a thing. I think it's a myth. And I think, to be honest, if you look at Jim Goodwin, it hasn't worked. You look at Sean Maloney, it didn't work. You look at Stephen Robinson at St Mirren so far, it's not worked. I think it's a myth.
Well, it's maybe not something that happens all the time, but it does. I think it does happen enough for it to be not a myth. But we'll agree to disagree on that.
I just like being controversial.
I know. Plus, I'm not close enough to hit you, so.
Well, that's very true. Social distancing and all that. I think Stephen Robinson, he did a decent job at Motherwell when he was there, but he's come to St Mirren. Obviously, he's lost a really big player in Jamie McGrath, who left St Mirren. I think Conor Ronan's a very good player, but again, I think he will potentially leave in the summer. Hearts are after him, Aberdeen are after him, and St Pauli are after him. So again, it's going to be a case of St Mirren looking to try and sign players in the summer for. I don't know what St Mirren's expectation will be next season. Possibly top 6. I don't know.
Well, I think teams like St Mirren, Livingston, that should kind of be where they want to get to. Is to get into that top 6 spot. They're never really going to win the league. Let's be honest about it. It would be a major shock if anybody out with of Celtic or Rangers win the Premier League. But that's not to say the likes of a Hearts or if they were playing well enough, and Aberdeen could get in there and split it. But again, as I say, it comes down to cash. And the people that can afford to buy the better players, generally speaking, are the people that are going to win. Oh,
hello, lads.
Now, as you can all see, we have been joined for the last half an hour by Mr. Regan Stevenson, the Invisible Man. Regan, where have you been?
Dad, we just got home, mate.
You just got home?
Can I just say, can we have a moment's silence for the late Regan Stevenson?
Regan, you missed a great show so far, mate.
See that taxi you got, Regan? Was it horse-drawn by any chance?
I've been commenting. I said I've been enjoying the show, lads. I've been enjoying it.
I know. I knew when I seen that message it was from. I knew it was from you. But it's great to have you on, mate. How are you?
I'm not bad. Not bad. Sorry, I'm late.
That's all right, mate. We'll forgive you just this once.
Some days I'm busy, Anyway, lads, no, big weekend to come. big weekend. I'll be there. I'm looking forward to it.
Have you got a hot date this weekend, Regan? Is that what it is? Oh, sorry, you're talking about the football. Sorry.
I don't wish to talk about my love life live on the radio, but anyway.
He's watching Britain's Got Talent tomorrow. That's what he's talking about.
Aye, but it's,
He's talking about it, right? Okay.
there's a big game at Celtic Park at the weekend. You might know about that. So I'll
No,
be
we
there.
didn't know about that, mate. We didn't know about that. That's
I'll be there.
breaking news.
I did
Are
see.
you going? Aye.
I'll be there, James. Yep.
Good man. That's what I like to
Oh.
hear. You'll be mixed up with your pals there at Celtic Park. You know, Ange, Joe Hart. You know, Regan's in with all the big boys. I don't know if you knew that, Graham. He's pals with all.
I did. Regan's a popular man. Okay, Regan, seeing as you're here, we've only got half an hour to go, but seeing as you're here, let's get your thoughts on Sunday, Celtic Rangers. What's your thoughts?
My thoughts is that Celtic will blow Rangers away and Celtic win 3-0 again.
There we go.
I don't think Rangers are strong enough. I think Rangers have not got a striker. They're looking at my roof on Alfredo Morelos. So I think it's difficult for Rangers to put a challenge in.
But I don't know if you caught us earlier, Regan, when we were saying that even if Rangers were to win on Sunday, I thought that it wouldn't make any difference to where the title lands up, because I think Celtic have got enough points plus plenty of goals to make it absolutely impossible. No,
James, I disagree. I disagree with that because I'm a bit more negative than you. I would start to get too worried and hide behind the couch, you know. So for me, I would take a draw right now and put your hand off for a draw, James. I just couldn't face it. If Rangers winning Sunday, the title is back on.
Well, that's one of the things. That's what I put at the bottom of the screen, Regan. Is Celtic Rangers a potential title decider?
Yes, it is. Rangers need to win. Celtic don't need to win, and Celtic need a draw. 6 points gap, 2 games to go. Celtic can afford to lose a game.
I'm going to get your thoughts on something else. I'm going to get your thoughts on something else we talked about as well, Regan, seeing as you're here because you were late. Let's get your thoughts about the potential of Roy Keane to Hibs.
If Roy, I said this to one of my pals there a couple of days ago, but if Roy Keane gets the Hibs job, I want access to Hibs press conferences every single Friday. You know, because that would be my dream interview, honestly. So the locker room better get access to the Easter Road on a Friday afternoon because I want to be there.
I'll make some calls for you, Regan. Okay.
That's fine, James. That's all right.
You'll have to ask the boss man about that.
But I think Roy Keane would just be sensational.
Do you think that he's probably the best manager at the moment that they require to kind of get a reaction from the players, or would you think somebody like a Philip Cocu might be potentially better?
I think Philip Cocu would be the better option, but for the whole dramatisation of Scottish football, Roy Keane would just be amazing. You know,
I asked James this earlier, Regan. Do you think it was a bit harsh to sack Sean Maloney after only 19 games in charge?
Yep, I do, and I think it's a disgrace. The Hibs are charging £32 for the game tomorrow against Aberdeen, where no team needs to win. £32 to go into that game. Are you having a laugh?
So I take it you're not going there then, no?
I will not be going there, no. But
he's not got a date to go with. He can't go.
But do you know that's a disgrace though?
To be honest, I think the price for tickets in Scottish football is a disgrace anyway. You know,
but James, both of those teams have got nothing to play for. It's just a game. If you're a Hibs supporter and an Aberdeen supporter, you go along and watch.
Absolutely, and that's what the club rely on, isn't it? They rely on that sort of dedication from fans, so that's why they get away with charging that kind of money.
Yep.
But personally, I think, that the game should probably be around about 20 quid, maybe 25, I think would be a much fairer option for a ticket price.
Yep. Something else I just wanted to, I don't know if you guys have touched on it, but the snooker this weekend, we've got John Higgins. I don't know what the score is right now, but he's right a battle for a final spot again.
Yeah, against the Ronnie O'Sullivan man. It was 7-6 to Ronnie O'Sullivan before we went on air because I had been watching it.
Oh,
It is one of those games, where it's like Ronnie O'Sullivan gets a frame, John Higgins gets a frame, Ronnie O'Sullivan gets, it's one of those kind of games, it's like tit for tat. But I think it's going to be an absolute classic. I think it will probably go all the way to the wire.
Let's delve back into the football just now because we still have a couple of games to look at for tomorrow. Dundee United against Ross Motherwell tomorrow. Again, potentially a very big game. Both teams still trying to get that, fourth place. Dundee United at the moment are fourth. Obviously, I watched them against Hearts last week, and for the first 10 minutes, I thought United played well, but then Hearts came back into the game. Regan, I'll get your thoughts on this game. What are you expecting from Dundee United and Motherwell tomorrow?
I'm expecting a very close game, but I'm expecting quite a Friday game as well because, as we know, Tony Watt left and the Motherwell chairman got a bit heated the last time the two of them played when Tony Watt scored. But I was really disappointed for Motherwell against Rangers. I thought when they went to 1-1 and Rangers were that down to 10 men, I thought Motherwell were very disappointing. I think Motherwell are missing a striker or a forward player that can really open up doors. So if I'm being neutral about it, I think Dundee United are probably the ones that you would look at to finish in that fourth spot.
James, Motherwell had only won one game this year and they're in the top six. I mean, that just sums up the cinch, doesn't it?
It does. Again, Motherwell have been a bit of a disappointment. Certainly, I think they missed Tony Watt. Not necessarily for goal scoring, but I think he brings to a team, something just a wee bit different. And there may be a good journeyman team, Motherwell. It's an old expression. I don't know if you guys will understand that. A journeyman team. But, they're not flashy. But I was surprised that they haven't won more games. And again, you don't expect them to win games against the likes of Celtic or Rangers. You always expect that they're going to do it against the teams round about them that they're fighting against. But even in that position, they've not really been that good. And for that, I think Dundee United will probably win it about 2-1.
Regan, I think we've all spoken about Thomas Coates on the show before. I think he's done a great job at United.
Yeah, I mean, he's fantastic. I mean, I think the job that he's done is probably been overshadowed by Derek McInnes, Dick Campbell, Robbie Neilson. But what the job he's done this year has been incredible as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think my prediction tomorrow, again, it's another difficult game. As I say, United, they played okay in spells against Hearts last week, but Hearts just had a bit more quality. I'm going to go 2-1 United tomorrow. James?
2-1 for me as well.
Regan?
3-0.
For Motherwell.
For Dundee United.
Try to trip them up there.
Good prediction. So let's go.
I've only been here 5 minutes, James.
So let's go to the undoubted game of the day. Of course, it's Tynecastle. I saved that till last. Saved the best till last.
So was that ladies?
No, they play on Sunday. But it is Hearts against Ross County. Hearts, as we know, third in the league.
That's a
Hearts have wrapped up third. We are in the group stage. I can never tire of saying this. We're in the group stage of European football. Ross County with probably one of the players of the season, as we know, Regan Charles-Cook. So I'm going to get your thoughts first on this, James. What do you reckon the Hearts against Ross County?
Ross County 3-0.
And thanks, James. It's been nice knowing you.
And a hat-trick from Regan Charles-Cook.
My namesake.
What, Regan Charles-Cook? I thought you were Regan Stevenson.
It's close enough.
No, I do think Ross County will win, but I don't think it'll be 3-0. I think it'll probably be 2-1.
I'm speechless. No, I'm only joking. Regan, what's your thoughts tomorrow?
My thoughts is it's probably going to be a great game. I'd probably go along to that. I'd probably pay 36 quid to see that than Aberdeen Hibs, because that game would just, but yeah, I think that in terms of that game, I think that Malcolm McKay will be feeling pretty confident going into that, because they gave Celtic a really good game last week, and they've been apart from the Celtic game, they've been in very good form. So, yep, and I think Robbie Neilson's men might be on the beach because they've been secured third for a while, and as we know, James and Graham, people can be on the beach at this time. So,
especially Portobello, it's a nice beach at this time of year.
Yep. So I'm going to go 1-0 to Ross County.
Ooh.
Well, to be fair, we weren't on the beach last week against United.
But they don't really have much of a beach up in Dundee. So.
The city of discovery. What are you discovering? It's not a beach. It's gonna come as absolutely no surprise that I'm going for a Hearts win, and I'm gonna go Hearts 3, Ross County 1, and I'm gonna go Barry Mackay, Ellis Sims, and I'm gonna go for an absolute raker from 30 yards for Stephen Kingsley. There you go.
He's been a great signing this year.
He's been absolutely brilliant.
I thought you were going to say the third goal scorer, Craig Gordon, there.
Well, if we get a penalty, I'll let him take it just for banter. Now, before I talk about what I want to talk about for the next few minutes, I just want to talk about the championship games, because obviously tonight it's the end of the championship season, and we have Arbroath against Morton, we have Ayr against Partick Thistle, we have Dunfermline against Queen of the South, we've got Inverness against Hamilton, and Wraith Rovers against Kilmarnock, who are already promoted. Regan, I think most people were watching that Kilmarnock against Arbroath game last week, wanting Arbroath to win, but as me and James have spoke about earlier, Arbroath could still come up through the playoff.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you a story about that game, actually. Was watching it to half-time and I fell asleep. So I checked the score the next morning, and I noticed that the Commander were winning by 2-1. So I dozed off at half-time. It was 1-0 to Arbroath. So I missed the best of the game.
I've done that.
You've now just told that story live on air. Love it.
No, but I think Derek McInnes has been in there and done a very good job, and you expect them to go up there and get the 3 points.
We've got about 30 minutes to go, so I'm going to ask this question to yourselves, and I'm going to ask it on the chat as well. And I actually mentioned this to James before we came on air. I'm going to get your thoughts first, Regan. Come up. We're going to have a plastic pitch in the Premiership.
Oh, my favourite. My favourite.
Go on, give us your thoughts. Give us your thoughts on the plastic pitch.
My thoughts is they scrap it. It should be banned from football. They should scrap it, because if you're playing in a top flight league, it's not good to see. And I'm disappointed that my favourite person in the world, David Martindale, still got his pitch as well. So, no, it's quite disappointing, even though I'm happy for Kilmarnock, because I know a lot of the players, and I know Chris Buck pretty well. I'm happy for him, but I'm not happy that they've still got the plastic pitch.
James, we spoke about this before we came on here briefly. Give us your thoughts on the plastic pitches.
Yeah, I've got to agree with Regan. I don't think they should be allowed anywhere near a football game, regardless of the level of football. I think they are sacrilegious.
James, it's not often we agree, mate.
True, very true. See, we're agreeing again. But as I said to you earlier, I don't think teams, especially the likes of Celtic and Rangers, if they go to a team who's got a plastic pitch and get beat, I don't think they can say it's down to the plastic pitch, because they have those at their training facilities. And in my opinion, if you're going to play on a plastic pitch, you should be training on a plastic pitch.
It's still a good excuse.
It's not a good excuse at all. See, we're not agreeing anymore. The status quo has returned.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, I agree with you. I've said as well before we came on air that I've seen numerous times where players just won't play on plastic pitches, and I think that might happen again next season. We'll come on it back up.
Yeah. Again, it comes down to, as we spoke about, they're a hard pitch, right? And grass pitches can be hard as well, depending on the time of year, And as I said to you, if we went to summer football, we'd have to make sure that the grass pitches were well watered, because the ground can be rock hard if it's, quite a dry spell. But I don't know, I just think that the ball seems to do some strange things on plastic pitches as well, It just doesn't seem to roll the same way that it does on a grass pitch. So for me, it's a no-no.
Yeah, and Gordon McIntosh says, no place for plastic pitch. If you can travel to North Scotland and play on grass, there's no excuse for them. And again, I can't disagree with that. I think he's right. I'm not a massive fan of plastic pitches. But on to the Championship tonight. We obviously have Partick Thistle and Raith Rovers fighting out for that last remaining playoff place. Partick are 3 points ahead, but they do have a better goal difference. Reagan, who do you think is going to get that last playoff place between Partick and Raith?
Hopefully the Jags. Since we're a West of... I just think West of Scotland boys, we need Partick Thistle up there. I mean, I think Partick Thistle are a great club, and it'd be good to see them back up.
James, would you go along with that?
We're agreeing again, Regan.
Oh, no again.
No, I do. I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Partick Thistle.
Same here.
Through the years. I think it's probably because the great Bertie Auld came from just round the corner from Firhill, and obviously managed there as well. But I think Partick Thistle probably will just have a wee bit more in the tank than Raith Rovers. And if they're already 3 points in front, are Raith Rovers going to score enough goals against Kilmarnock to overtake that? I don't think so.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, we only have 9 minutes to go. Again, it's been a really lively show. Thank you for all the comments that have come in. But I wanted to spend the next few minutes talking about something that, again, we weren't on air last week, so we didn't have a chance to talk about it. But it's come in that VAR will be introduced into Scotland, but it won't come in until December. Now, Reagan, I don't have a problem with VAR coming in. What's your thoughts on this?
See, here's the problem. I do. I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't like it. I think it's bad to what he's doing in England, and I don't want our referees to operate it up here. That's my problem. And the other thing is that people are saying that this will clear up so much situations. I'm telling you right now, it won't. It'll just cause more controversy like it does up down in England.
See, the thing is, right, if you're going to bring it in, I don't know about you, James, but if you're going to bring it in, you've got to bring it in at the start of the season. Why bring it in halfway through a season? That, to me, is pointless. Well,
I can't disagree with that. It should be something that if it's coming in, it should be there right from day one. I kind of got a foot in both camps. I kind of like it and I don't like it. I think if it's used properly, it can be a great tool. But unfortunately, very often it's not getting used properly. I know we all go on about, well, the referee only gets to see it once, and has to make a decision, split second. But now with VAR, I sometimes feel that the referee, when he's getting spoken to in his ear by the guy in the VAR room, could get influenced.
Yes, I agree.
If the guy thinks, that should be a goal, that should stand, or that should be a penalty, that should stand, or not, depending on the situation, I think the referee could be swayed. And really, at the end of the day, the referee's the guy that should be making that decision.
I'll give you an example. Last week, Man U and Arsenal played. Don't know if you've seen the game, Graham.
Yeah.
But you had Mikel Arteta screaming in the referee's face just before he went to the screen. Then he went to the screen. It took minutes and minutes and minutes. Looked like he was not going to give it. But then he had a wee altercation with Arteta and he went straight to the penalty spot. To me, that just shows that he was a bit overawed by Arteta. Plus, he was a bit overawed by what was happening in his view as well.
Yeah.
Gordon McIntosh. Sorry, I'm just going to say Gordon McIntosh says, think they should only use VAR on goals or serious tackles. Seems way overused for many wrong things. This is the thing that I don't like in England, is the fact that for offside decisions, for example, they draw these little lines on. That's not what it's meant to be there for. It's meant to be used for clear and obvious errors.
But that is an obvious error if it's offside.
But James has mentioned that there a minute ago. See, if it's used properly, I don't have an issue with that. But if it's not going to be used properly, then I think it's probably pointless.
I do agree with that, though.
I must admit, I would agree that probably it should be used for things like, is it a goal? Is it not a goal? Probably, did he trip him up on the edge of the box, or in the box, or just outside the box, and then he fell into the box? These kind of things. I don't think, the whole offside thing is just absolutely mad to me, because let's be honest, a hair on your leg can be in an offside position. No, I'm sorry. I don't agree with that at all.
Depends how much hair you've got. It's hard to tell.
Speak for yourself.
I was. But I think, I don't agree with the fact that they draw these. You look at some of the, the stills on these, and the offside is so tight, and they're drawn lines to show his little toenails offside. That I don't agree with. What I would say is, Reagan, I don't know if you remember this. Well, you will, because it was only 2 weeks ago. But see if you look at the Hearts semi-final 2 weeks ago, Josh Campbell's challenge on Barry Mackay, that's a red card all day long.
Yes, it is. You're right. I do agree that they should come in for tackles like that, but I don't want VAR to come in every single decision. The problem for me is I don't want it to be stop and start. Something that I do want to see in football, though, is a stop clock. I don't know what you guys think, because I'm sick and tired of watching games of football and they take about 4 or 5 minutes on a free kick and a throw in. We're just wasting time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
here's a question for you, right? This is going to be a bit controversial, a little bit, right? But let's say next season, right? Celtic Rangers, VAR. What's that going to be like?
Every bit as bad as it is at the moment.
But
that has potential to be an absolute disaster, really, because you're going to get fans of both teams, players of both teams, absolutely raging no matter what the decision is.
Which is what happens anyway, so there won't be any difference, really.
No, it's a bit of a shame, to be honest, because I feel like they should probably explain, because if you look at it, right, can you imagine if Rangers are playing at Ibrox and everybody's screaming for a handball? First thing they're going to do is go and look at VAR. They shouldn't do that, because they're obviously, like, see the way you see in England, empty touches the ball, it's like handball, you're straight away. Like, what's the point? You're just being influenced by the crowd, and any wee touch of the arm is away.
Yeah.
We only have about a minute left. After us tonight, I think we have the music of Steve B, I think, is on after us.
Yes.
And tomorrow, I'm going to let James do this because it's his show. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock, we have James E's Big Saturday show. James, what's coming up on your show tomorrow?
Oh, big secret. As always, there will be new artists. Not necessarily new in the sense that they've never played anywhere before, but they're going to be new to Indie Live Radio audiences. A couple of interesting ones, I have to say, tomorrow. So you'll have to tune in. Don't forget, tune in between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. for the Saturday show with me, James E., a.k.a. Mr. Grumpy.
Yeah, there's absolutely no better way to start Saturday morning. I always listen to James. It's always great.
Same
You
here.
can follow him. You can listen whenever you're out. Take him with you. He will follow you. It's not a bad thing because it is a very good show. He's not paying me to say that. It is actually very true. It just remains for me to thank James E. for joining me for the whole show. I would thank Reagan, but he's only just arrived about 10 minutes ago. But no, thank you, Reagan, for joining me. Thank you to both of you. And thank you for everyone that's tuned in and listened to us and joined the chat. We shall see you all next week. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.